Many health experts, politicians, and media outlets are saying that Canada is reopening the economy too quickly, that it's too risky to public health. But is it? Joining us today to discuss this is John Robson, a columnist with the National Post. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us here on Bridge City News.
Thank you.
John, what are the experts so afraid of by Canada reopening its economy? Do they believe that we run the risk of seeing hospitals overrun and massive deaths across the nation?
It's not entirely clear. I think the problem we face here fundamentally is that we don't know what we're trying to do, so we're having trouble doing it. You said at the beginning they think we're opening too quickly, but the appropriate question is too quickly for what? If the goal is that nobody will ever get this illness again, yeah, we're opening too quickly. We'll have to stay closed forever and die of something else quite soon. If it's too quickly to prevent this massive wave that was going to overwhelm the hospitals, well, it already didn't materialize. So we shouldn't be worrying about that because in order to clear the decks for this tsunami, they've postponed cardiac surgery, cancer surgery, all kinds of things that are going to cause people to die sooner than they otherwise would have. And the costs of doing so are mounting. Opening too quickly to get kids back to school and seeing their friends and getting back to learning in a more normal environment. All of these questions aren't being asked. The one thing seems to be we don't want anyone ever to get this disease.
Right.
And if it
Yeah.
were like the Black Death, there'd be some point to that. But we've seen by now that it's not. It is extremely dangerous to people who are old, very sick, or both. And they haven't been protected. So we're not opening too quickly for the people in seniors' homes. There's been a terrible toll there regardless. But for most people, it's not that dangerous. And the ongoing consequences of having, a quarter of the workforce unemployed, of businesses failing, of relationships collapsing, there are huge costs to this, which are being treated by people like everybody from Justin Trudeau to Doug Ford as though they just didn't exist. When Ford said he was closing the schools, he said, I will take no risks with the safety of your children. But he's taking significant risks with the safety of our children, just not with COVID-19. And that's the one thing. It's as though the only thing that matters in life is that you don't get COVID-19. Anything else is fine.
Now, John, you asked the question, is our goal to simply contain the virus or is it to eradicate it? The approach to eradication is going to be very different, obviously, than containment, right?
Well, yeah, and again, we're treating it as though it was Ebola or something, that it must be absolutely eliminated, or terrible things will happen to our economy, our society, and all of us as individuals. But suppose somebody said, well, we're going to eradicate the flu. And we don't care what it costs. We don't care if we have to run a $300 billion federal deficit. We don't care if the federal government has to borrow more money than it takes in taxes. We don't care if we have to close the schools forever. We don't care what happens to anybody or anything. Your restaurant can fail. Your barbershop is gone. Never mind any of that stuff. There will never be another case of flu. People would say, well, you're insane, right? Even though flu does kill people. We know flu season does bring mortality with it, again, and particularly the old and the unwell, and to some extent the very young, which is not apparently the case with this SARS-CoV-2. But all of this is to think about the disease in the wrong way. We're imagining that how would you eradicate the common cold, right? If you set that as your goal, you destroy your economy, you destroy your society, and we'd still get colds. And that's the critical thing. We can't eradicate this. This is a worldwide virus that most people get it, they're asymptomatic. We have no idea how many cases there have actually been, probably a very large number, people who didn't even know they were sick or realized they were sick but weren't very sick. It's going to circulate. There's going to be a second wave and a third wave. It's going to be with us for years, but it's not going to be killing people. What's going to kill people is continuing the lockdown.
Yeah, now that's interesting that you bring up the second wave. So there is a lot of talk about trying to prevent that second wave of COVID-19, but realistically, is it actually possible to stop a second wave?
Well, no, it is. You could shoot everybody, but, really it's not, because we're going to end the lockdown. It's out there in the community. People have it who don't even know they've got it, and they're going to give it to other people, many of whom won't know they have it. But it's like, again, with the flu. Suppose you got a flu season and you said, we're going to stop there being a second wave. You couldn't do it, and the cost of trying would be prohibitive. Sure, there's going to be a second wave. This is one of these things. Diseases arrive, they get loose, they become endemic. And they settle down, and we develop some kind of immunity to them, and they become less lethal because otherwise they kill off their host. For the most part, that's the common cold, right? There isn't just one common cold. There are colds. There isn't just one flu. Every year it's like, oh, it's a new flu. And then, we try and vaccinate. Sometimes we hit our target, sometimes we miss. But for the most part, again, you get the flu and you go, oh, terrible. And then you get up and you go back to work or whatever you were doing. And the people who die of it were mostly people. I'm not trying to be callous here. We all hope to be there one day, but it's a fact. Most of the people who die of the flu were likely to die of something reasonably soon anyway. And we can't prevent it, and we don't try. And sure, the flu comes and goes in waves, and it comes and goes in mutations. Because one of the funny things is that the people who seem most keen on the lockdown are normally the people who are also like, evolution's great, evolution's everywhere, evolution explains everything. And then you say, you do realize that diseases evolve too, right? Even these miserable viruses aren't alive and they evolve. That's a dirty trick. But the virus is going to adapt, it's going to evolve. There are going to be new strains of the thing. It's everywhere. It's around the world. What do you think it's going to do? Just go away because we don't like it? So that's why I say we're trying to do the wrong thing. We're trying to make it go away instead of trying to balance the harm of medical consequences versus the harm of the restrictions and find the best balance we can between the two. And again, you're seeing now the federal government is getting close to insolvency. The provinces I don't like to think about. Businesses are failing. People are sinking into despair. Where's the federal government going to find these hundreds of billions of dollars it's spending? They're injecting liquidity into the economy from a tank in the Peace Tower. No, they got to borrow it from capital markets that are in a mess because people's savings are collapsing. There are all kinds of very harmful consequences from overreacting. And again, in the early stages, we didn't know. We thought it really might be highly contagious, highly lethal, and we should have shut down more firmly than we did, right? Remember the government saying, oh, you don't need to close the borders. That's silly. You don't need to wear a mask. That's silly. Who's this idiot? And again, it's not a partisan thing. Doug Ford said, go enjoy March break. Bill de Blasio in New York City, hey, get out to Chinatown. Don't stay in. Phooey to this virus. So we could have reacted sooner. But now that we've overreacted, it's time to not to repeat the mistake. Don't react too early and then end the quarantine too late and then end the quarantine too late. Recognize this is something we've got to live with, but we must get the economy going. We must get our lives going again. There's that line from the Croods, this isn't living, it's just not dying. But again,
Interesting.
the consequences to people's lives, depression, alcoholism, suicide, there are real devastating consequences to destroying people's businesses, livelihoods, and hopes. You can't treat it as though it's all free. It's not.
Now let's talk about flattening the curve. So it would appear that the curve has been flattened in Canada, but our leaders are being very cautious. And if we were to see some increases in infections or deaths coinciding with the reopening, then would they deem the reopening as being the wrong decision? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they would. They've got this kind of safety paranoia, right? We live in a world where we're all bubble wrapped mentally, that we think nothing bad should ever happen. So it's like, hey, there's a worldwide pandemic. Oh, well, you got to make sure nothing bad happens. So you can't. There's a worldwide pandemic. Those are bad, right? For obvious reasons. But imagine if we get a partial unlocking. And again, the schools in Ontario, they just shut them down. So that's not even an issue. And then you tell everybody, go back in. Nope, you just got your business restarted. You just thought maybe you're going to make it. Nope, you're not going to make it. Get back into your house. I don't think the populace would stand for it, and I don't think they should. This is crazy. Again, if you start to see half the population getting it and 1% of those dying, maybe you got to be a little more extreme. And that's what we thought was going to happen. And I think half of the population probably is going to get it, may already have. But the infection fatality rate is actually a lot lower than that. So yeah, you're going to see more cases, you're going to see a few more deaths. But again, you look at the statistics. What proportion of the deaths have been people who have been 80 or older, right? And I'm not saying that we should not be concerned about the elderly, but we haven't managed to protect them. But why would you lock down an entire economy when the risk to people who are under 60, who don't have a compromised immune system or certain other things, apparently diabetes is associated with vulnerability to it. There's a few other things. But why would you tell everybody who's not at risk of a really adverse outcome that they can't do anything for the next year and expect that the result wouldn't be justified unwillingness to comply? And again, another $300 billion deficit? How many years do you think you can do before something really awful happens? And I'm not asking Justin Trudeau because I don't think he understands where wealth comes from. But we need to understand it. People must be out creating wealth or there will not be wealth for politicians to hand out. It's that simple.
Yeah, and where's the money coming from too, right?
Well, yeah, they were just printing it. They took out the old Monopoly game.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could ask what rate of new cases and number of deaths is the Canadian public willing to accept? So I know it's not an apples to apples comparison with COVID-19 and the flu, as you mentioned influenza before, but every year, what is it, about 650,000 people are dying globally from influenza. So we don't go into monumental debt to try to wipe out the flu, right? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, early on, I watched an interesting video from a guy in Germany who was pointing out the sort of alarming fact that 2,600 people a day die in Germany every day, predictably. I mean, more die in the winter than in the summer, but distributed over the year. And he said 2,200 of them are 65 or older. And so a lot of people are going to die every year, and they're going to die of the flu, or they're going to die of COVID-19, or they're going to die of pneumonia, or they're going to die of a heart attack. They're going to die of something. And if the result of this disease is that they die of this instead of something else, but the total number of excess deaths is trivial, then all of this was essentially for nothing. And that may actually turn out to be the case. We'll need to see the excess death figure overall. But then again, there are excess deaths from the lockdown, and you've got to subtract those from the figure. But yeah, if you know that, so the numbers now escape me. I had actually done the calculation for Canada. But a certain number of Canadians die very predictably every year. A certain number of Ontarians die every year, and we're all going to die. It's sad but true, and you can't stop it. So the question is, are we facing a situation where a lot more people will die if we don't remain severely in lockdown? And if we're not, I mean, they give how many deaths are we willing to accept? Well, don't ask me, ask God, right? Because he said you're all going to die. And it's like, I don't accept that. And God's like, guess what? That makes no difference.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that more people might die because of a lockdown, because there are medical professionals that are pointing out that while the lockdown may have prevented some deaths, it also may have caused other deaths through, canceled surgeries, suicides. Others are maybe dying from illnesses that they simply didn't get help for out of fear of contracting the illness, right? So what are we know that you're very passionate about this.
Canada's had a problem for years of these long waiting lists for healthcare, and these kill people. People die every day on waiting lists. They don't always die because they're on a waiting list. Some of them would have died anyway, but some do die because their treatment is delayed. And I'm very much hoping Brian Day is going to win his lawsuit, because we need to allow people to get medical health. It's outrageous that we tell people, you may think you're sick, but we don't care. You can't get treatment. But we're postponing these surgeries, so that problem is going to get worse. So there's specific medical reasons that more people will die, and then there's just the more general reason that man does not live by bread alone. People need hope. They need social contact. They need purpose in their lives. And that's what I mean about this isn't living, it's just not dying. Sitting in your house just not dying will kill you. And that is one of these paradoxes. But politicians don't think in terms of trade-offs. They think of saving us from everything, including purple dragons. And so they couldn't be more pleased with themselves, saying, no, 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 you silly person, you're not going out. I remember, Justin Trudeau, don't go to the cottage over Easter. I'm going to the cottage over Easter. Oh, Doug Ford, don't go to your cottage. I'm going to my cottage. Oh, my daughter's visited. That's nice. Don't have your daughters visit, right? So they're having a grand old time, handing out free money. Everybody loves them. The opposition is sidelined. But the fact that politicians are having fun is rarely a sign that something good is happening, and it certainly isn't here.
Now, John, you made an excellent point in your National Post article which is how well will we be prepared to deal with the next pandemic, especially if it's more serious, when we have basically destroyed our economy dealing with COVID-19? Where will the finances come from for that?
Yeah, because if you look at the conditions that gave rise to this pandemic, the globalized world with air travel, with big cities, with things moving around the planet like this is virus heaven, which is not good news. But you can't change it. We're not going to say, okay, no, we're going to ban the airplane. Someone will still fly. So there will be other pandemics, and we're going to see something almost certainly that is worse than this one, and especially in terms of the people it kills and how many. Look at the Spanish flu, right? That one killed healthy young people in large numbers. It seemed to prefer them to the old and the unwell, which is very odd. So when the next one comes and we can't lock down and we can't find more stimulus spending and we don't have protective equipment, so we need to get the economy going. We need to start stockpiling PPE and rotating the stockpiles like the idiots. We piled up a bunch of it with the first SARS, then we threw it all out. Like, that's government for you. They say businesses don't have long time horizons. Give me a break. But we need to be resilient. We need to understand how to operate and again, I think what we should have done on this one, quarantine the vulnerable. don't quarantine everybody. Nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever reacted to some disease by saying everybody go hide under the bed. And again, you look at the at who's dying of it. 80% of the deaths apparently in this country, 80% are people in seniors' homes. So that's who was most vulnerable. And of the other 20%, a lot of them would have had a lot of the same kind of health problems that you typically find among residents of seniors' homes. So we have wildly overreacted. And that leaves us without resources. So we need to start rebuilding our resources. We need to get the economy back on its feet. We need to free up the medical system, let some air in there. We need to be sensible about stockpiling. We need to do all the things it will take to be ready for the next one, and not getting out of our houses and letting the economy die and governments go into insolvency is not the answer.
John, thank you so much for your thoughts and your opinions there. That is John Robson, a columnist with the National Post.